Right, hello everybody. I appreciate the fact that I've only got 20 minutes. So what I want to talk about is how technology is assisting us in the way that we assess risk, but at the same time, it is not replacing some of the traditional sources around, the human element of what gets fed into that technology. And I'm going to use a couple of examples to reinforce my statement and narrative, one Ukraine and the other looking at Myanmar. Now what we're seeing is, there is our company and many other companies now have the platforms which many of you already buy into, and these are improving. They started, originally they were really focusing on the travel management piece, duty of care, and now they're evolving with the introduction of AI to become a lot more user-friendly, and what a reoccurring theme is, the refresh rates is much higher as well. So the intelligence and information in there is no longer out of date. And they are becoming excellent tools. Most GOCs have access to these products, and they are improving all the time. You've got, certainly in the next 12 months, you're going to see an explosion in AI. All the big tech companies are now all over that, and you're going to see these platforms benefit from that. They're becoming easier to use, and also they're very highly adaptable in the sense that they can be configured to your business. So you're not fed information that you don't need, and they're very focused on your industry, for example, supply chain monitoring. They also obviously come with apps that you can have on your phone, and this of course means that you can distribute them out to your workforce, and then it builds in that duty of care. And you've also got the combination now of both medical and security, which can be triaged depending on what you require. We're also seeing AI, and the issue with AI, and we brought this up yesterday, it is an amazing tool. It speeds up the assessment, the analysis of information, and the refresh rates, so that whatever product you use, the intelligence that you're going to be relying on is going to be more and more up to date. However, as we said yesterday, AI is not infallible, and if you have fake news which is fed into the system, what it can do is in fact infect, like a virus, the narrative, and then you could actually receive corrupted information. So whilst AI is being used, you do need the checks and balances in place to review that product, and ultimately that will also have to include a human element as well before it goes out to the client. This is particularly important when a lot of these products are now used by governments, and the T&Cs and the KPIs with anything. When you are supporting governments, you have to make sure you get it right. So AI is great, but you must have those checks and balances in place to make sure that that man-machine interface produces accurate intel. But it is speeding it up, and that is what clients want. They don't like old information. They want to make sure that what they receive to aid in that risk management decision-making process is very current and accurate. So as you'll see now, most products now produce what we see on here. You've got a 24-hour alerts, you get local int, and actually it's not just the intelligence at the very sort of high level, what we call big hand, small maps. It's really much what people want now is in the weeds intelligence right down at the micro level. And again, this is all going to be supported by these, certainly in the next 12 months, you'll see a great leap in the way that AI is supporting this. So what I want to do is talk through a couple of case histories, the benefits of how technology can support risk management. We're all aware of what happened in Ukraine. Certainly from a supply chain perspective, Ukraine is a big producer of agriculture. It's got a lot of extractive industry. It also is investing very heavily in renewable energy. And it is a very interesting, very beautiful country, a very big country. It would be the biggest in Europe if it ever joined the EU. And of course, we saw what happened with the Russian invasion. I was actually in Kyiv a week before the invasion, and then got caught there, and actually had to evacuate myself, and my team took us 40 hours to get to the Romanian border, and then we had to actually abandon our vehicle and walk 12 kilometers on foot, and then it took 10 hours to get across the border. And, you know, I've been raised in Asia, and I wasn't used to just how cold it can get in Eastern Europe. And it was quite, you know, just what you see and saw over that period was actually quite traumatic. But the ability then to leave that country and then turn it around and then very quickly do the assessments around the supply chain, particularly the border crossing points, you know, because we recognized early on that the priority was about people getting out of the country. But as soon as the front line stabilized, then of course you were looking at, you know, in large swathes of Ukraine, it is actually business as normal, which is a surprise when you look at the media. You know, once you're away from the front lines, you know, people are trying to get on with their lives, and it's a pretty stoic population. And as I say, you know, clients were returning, and you had traffic returning in the other direction. So the ability to monitor borders, now we can use technology to collate that information and share that with clients, particularly around how long is it going to take my truck to cross through this BXP point, this border crossing point, whether it's going in or it's going into the country or it's leaving the country. What are the changes in paperwork I need to ensure that we fill out? You know, what are the processes? I mean, of course, with Ukraine, very early on, you know, no males were allowed to leave the country, so only people who were exiting the country were either females or children, but no adult Ukrainian males. So that was a straight away, day one, that was being prevented. Also, on the other side of the border, you had a lot of EU, you know, Europol, NGOs, because there was a big concern about human trafficking, and that added a whole new layer with the processing of people and goods coming out. So whilst the technology can share that information through these various platforms, it still requires human beings on the ground to physically go to every single border crossing point, look at how congested they are, time, how long it takes to enter the country, time, how long it takes to get out the country, because you had trucks that were sitting at the borders, certainly in the south, where a lot of the grain was coming out, that could be there for 3 or 4 days. And of course, that is time wasted, and time costs money. The loss of the Black Sea ports, again, all the ships that were stuck in the Black Sea, they're still there to this day. So that part of the supply chain is basically frozen, except for those pre-agreed grain transshipment points. No air is coming out of Ukraine. So again, that means additional stress on the border crossing points. And some of you may be aware of this, or some you may not be aware of this, but the railway gauge in Ukraine and Russia is different to the railway gauge in Europe and Poland. So anything you want to move by train, once it reaches the border, either the product has to be offloaded and put onto a new train, or you have to lift the carriages off and put them onto a different bogie, you know, wheel section. So that in itself takes time. So, you know, clients were clamoring for information about, you know, can we get into the country? What are the changes in requirements? Also, later on, as the front line stabilized, there's a lot of companies that had factories in Ukraine and manufacturing facilities. They wanted to know what condition they were in, particularly those ones closer to the front line. So that required those facilities to be audited. That information then fed into the system, and again, the risk management tool allows you to disseminate that information to the clients. And of course, we had added layers of problems around unexploded ordnance in some areas as well, which meant you have to bring in additional expertise to survey those routes. So, you know, the real comment here really is that whilst technology is a fantastic way in which we can disseminate information, you know, the need to have that human on the ground that gets a real close, in the weeds look at what we term as atmospherics, that can then feed that information into those platforms, is what we found certainly clients wanted. They didn't want the sort of the big picture information about, you know, where, you know, in a lot of cases, where's this going? Is the war going to end? They wanted that in the weeds. Is this road open? You know, can I drive this truck, which is taking a turbine propeller for one of the large wind farms there, which is not your standard 40-foot container. These are big, heavy loads. How am I going to get that into the country, and how am I going to get it to where it needs to be? Because, as I said, whilst in the news, Ukraine is still dominating the news, there are whole swathes of that country which feel actually quite normal. Certainly, in the western parts of the country. And that whole issue around, border crossing points, for example, Poland, you're still probably looking at 4 to 6 hours trying to get in, whereas, down in Moldova, it was taking me 5 minutes to cross into Ukraine, and then, you're only 35 minutes then from Odessa, and then on to Mykolaiv when all the ports, and there's a lot of grain, obviously a lot of grain shipments coming out. So the intel on the ground, in the weeds, which again can be then fed into the technology, the modern technology, and then AI is contributing to that, which then allows people to access that information and keep updated. So interesting exercise still going on, and certainly from a logistics perspective, very challenging. But as I said, Ukrainians and the adjacent countries seem to have adapted, and certainly when you go and drive around the country, there is a lot of activity on the roads, both coming into the country and leaving the country. The second example I want to, which is a bit closer to home, is as we look at Ukraine, as I've just talked about Ukraine briefly, you have very clear front lines in Ukraine, which is in the east. We're seeing the Ukrainians starting their offensive, but still the lines aren't really moving. So you have, as I said, you've got whole swathes of the country which are near enough to normal as it can be. The issue with Myanmar, of course, is we are in effect experience a civil war. So there is no area within Myanmar which is safe. And both sides of the current conflict, both the opposition groups and the military, continue to be engaged in their various campaigns. And you just don't hear about it as much as you should, because, of course, Ukraine is dominating the headlines. Now, as far as foreign investment is concerned, we've seen a lot of companies looking to withdraw from market, simply because of the risk, but also because certainly European companies do not want to be associated with Myanmar anymore because of human rights pressure, and to be seen to be facilitating a government which, in certain people's eyes, believe is an oppressive state. So we've seen a lot of foreign companies withdraw from market, and one of the issues we have, and this is where technology is playing a key role, certainly at the strategic level, which is the boardroom level, the C-suite level, is clients are very concerned about how their business is trending, both out of the country and in the country. So what the technology can do is it can sweep social media like a ship's radar. And again, the great thing about AI and tech is it doesn't take any holidays, it works 24/7, it writes and reads every language, okay? So what you're able to do is you're able to switch on this tech. It sweeps social media in that country, whether that's all your Facebooks, your Twitters, all the local platforms, and very quickly through the way the analytics work and the reporting, you can see how your brand is trending. Now, is it trending in the perception of the population that you are pro-junta or pro-military, or are you trending that you are seen as being pro-opposition groups? And this has an impact on the risk associated with your brand. So if you are trending, or clients are trending as being seen as pro-opposition, what we witnessed was a spike in the number of detentions of local employees and actually expats working in country being brought in by the authorities for what we would term as a distressed interview, and basically, in effect, a warning that, you shouldn't be seen to be supporting the opposition groups. If you were trending in the other direction, and the perception was that you as a company were pro-opposition groups, pro-government, then what we saw was the opposition parties then targeting those companies with acts of violence. So arson attacks, threats against staff, and actually we did witness in some cases, unfortunately, some drive-by shootings, and in one case, one of the local leaders was actually killed in a drive-by shooting, because in the eyes of the opposition party, they were perceived as being pro-military. So by going through that media trending, what it allowed companies to do is it allowed them to manage the narrative and walk that fine line between being seen either supporting one side or the other and remain neutral up until the point which they could withdraw from market. So that technology there was very, very good in providing that constant 24/7 monitoring, allowing the senior leadership team to manage the crisis comms piece, because if you look at crisis management, there's two elements to it. There's managing of the incident, and then, of course, there's the managing of the crisis comms piece, whether that's to internal stakeholders or external stakeholders. And so that supporting daily reporting and constant monitoring allowed the leadership to keep that maintain that very fine line of impartiality, thereby they weren't targeted by either side of the opposition or the government. And that allowed them to continue their business until they finally withdrew from market. So, technology is very useful if applied well. And again, as I mentioned before, in the next 12 months, you are going to see an explosion in AI because the amount of money that's being poured into it, and again, that is just to help speed up the processing of taking that information, analyzing it, hopefully, as most sensible companies will do, is put that through a human gatekeeper so that we don't have an issue whereby the information is incorrect because it's been built on fake news, but it's supplying very, very good intel now because it's been analyzed, which helps you in that decision-making process. So that's really what I wanted to discuss. I mean, there is a few minutes for any questions, should anybody have any. But I have basically come to the end of my presentation. Okay. All right. Well, thank you very much.